Welcome to the Profile Corner. Today's video is part 6 in the mortise and tenon series. In today's video, we'll be cutting a mortise into this section of this 1.5 by 1.5 board for a tenon to fit in. That'll be cut into this board, and it should fit in just about like that. And the tenon will be about 3/4 of an inch long, and so that means that I need to cut this mortise a little bit over 3/4 of an inch, so I'll go down 7/8 of an inch. We'll be using this mortising chisel. It's a 12mm chisel, and 12 millimeters is just a little bit under a 1/2 inch. So what I've done here is I've taken my marking gauge. This is an old Stanley model, looks like it's a 61 that I picked up at an auction. It had a sharp point on it, but I didn't like that because it wasn't actually sharp. And so I took a file and I went along this edge here and also along this edge to make it more like a knife edge instead of like a pencil point. And then I took that and I scribed just one line here. And I started scribing another line here, but I didn't really like that. So I decided not to scribe it all the way, because if you just have one line to follow, that's easier than trying to figure out, okay, do I need to follow this line or this line if my 12mm mortising chisel doesn't quite line up with a 1/2 inch wide mortise line here. And then what I've also done is I've taken my square and run across at various intervals, spaced out maybe 3/16 of an inch or an 1/8 inch apart, all the way across, just to give me kind of a indication of where I need to put this chisel when I'm using it. Now, you do want to make sure that you've got a sharp chisel. I did sharpen this one a couple weeks ago, and so it should be reasonably sharp. The issue that I've got is that my mallet here is probably not heavy enough to actually drive it in well enough. I had done a little bit of an experiment here in southern yellow pine, and it was rather rough. So we're going to try it with some black walnut here and see if we have any better luck with this, because here the early wood and the late wood are less defined than in southern yellow pine, so that may make it a little bit nicer of a cut. Okay, and I put some blue tape onto the chisel at 7/8 of an inch, so that way I know how deep I need to go with the chisel. I've seen various people doing mortises. As a matter of fact, I just watched a couple of the Woodwright Shop videos that I found on YouTube, where Roy Underhill chopped out mortises by hand, and he would usually pre-drill to make it easier to chop using a chisel, but he didn't always do that. And I've also seen some other people on YouTube doing it without drilling out the holes. They just go in as a way, I guess, is to relieve stress, and they just chop it by hand. So I think I'll do that today. I don't chop mortises very frequently, and so this won't be expert advice, but we'll give it a shot here and see what happens. And then at the end of this video, we'll cut something over on the PantoRouter also. Okay, so I don't want to start right here on the end, and I want to have the bevel going in the direction that the chisel's going to be going as we progress across the mortise. And so I'll start here roughly at the line that I've got marked, and I want to make sure that I'm square. If the chisel's been sharpened right, it should still have a square tip. Now, these Nerex chisels are a little bit interesting in that the sides here are slightly beveled, and so it complicates the process of sharpening, as well as the long bevel here makes it difficult to get a decent grind on the end of the chisel. because, of course, the chisel wheel has a 10-inch radius on the Tormek, and so that makes it a little bit more challenging to sharpen these. Okay, so we've got it in the right spot. I'll hit it. I don't want to go necessarily too deep right now. And each blow, as I move across, should go in a little bit deeper, because this bevel is going to be forcing the chisel backward. And so it'll actually make it easier to go deeper each time. Probably want to make sure that you've got a solid workbench when you're doing this too. Because these hammer blows could cause some damage to the workbench if you didn't build it strongly. And as I mentioned, if you're looking for a way to release some stress, this is probably a good way to do it without causing too much harm. These mortising chisels tend to be a little bit more expensive than a regular bench chisel, but these are designed so that you don't risk the chance of bending a chisel while you're doing mortises. I've seen some talented people on YouTube actually using bench chisels that typically have flat edges instead of beveled edges to cut mortises, and they made it work. But this would be a good application for these mortising chisels. Because I didn't go all the way over to the line, which marks the end of the mortise, I should be able to lever against this edge here without causing any damage right here. And so I can lever against that to lift some chips out. That were previously cut. And it looks like we're down about 1/4 inch so far, at least in this portion of the mortise. So now I'll come back on this end here and send this down a little bit further again. And I'm still not quite to the end here on the mortise either. But I can come back and get that in a moment. Let's see if we can lever out any more. Okay, so we're possibly about halfway down now. And we'll come back and we'll get the ends, and we want to make sure that the bevel is away from the end. And be careful not to lever this direction, otherwise you'll ruin the end of the mortise. Okay, so we're ready to make another pass going down. Got to tighten up this clamp a little bit. And I've just turned the chisel around, face the opposite direction. And it looks like we're about down to the right depth now, at least in some spots. Okay, so let's take a peek at it. Okay, so here's where we're at right now with it. I still need to do a little bit more cleanup down in this area here. And then I need to verify that it's 3/4 of an inch all the way across. See if I can get a ruler in there. And so that is just over 3/4 of an inch in some areas here. And I still need to work it down a little bit further right down in this area here. Back up in here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a smaller chisel and go inside here and see if I can get further down inside to lever out the little bit that's remaining in there. Okay, we'll go back to the original chisel. And I want to just clean up the ends a little bit here. Make sure that they're down to the full depth. Okay, let's see how we're doing here. And just a little bit more to clean up right down in here. Okay, so let's check it for depth. And it looks like I took it down a little bit over 7/8 on this end. And then down here, it's down just over 3/4 of an inch. So I need to take that down just a hair more right at this end. Okay. Okay, so we've got that down to 7/8 of an inch now. All the way across. Okay, so now we can go work on creating the tenon that'll fit down in here. And what I'll do is I'll mount the custom tenoning jig back onto the table saw. And then we should be able to just take this edge down here 1/8 of an inch. Do the same thing here. Then take this edge down 1/2 inch. And the same over here. And it should just fit into the mortise. Now let's see how wide the mortise ended up being. Okay, the mortise looks like it's pretty much exactly 1/2 inch all the way across, even though our chisel is 12 millimeters, which is a little bit less than 1/2 inch. So that worked out pretty well using the metric Narex chisel. At the table saw here, we've set up the custom tenoning jig that we created in a previous video. I've set the blade height to 3/4 of an inch, so using a 3/4 inch setup block. I have the rip style blade in here that has 40 teeth on it again. And then what I've done is I've set the rip fence so that this blade, which is 1/8 inch wide, should take just less than 1/8 of an inch of a cut off the edge of the board here. I'll make that cut, flip the board over, make the cut again, and then I'll do a test fit down into our mortise and see if that fits. And if not, then I can sneak up on the fit. Okay, so here's their cut so far. Let's see if it goes into the mortise. Okay, as a matter of fact, it does go down into our mortise pretty much perfectly. So now we just need to cut the tenon to width here by using the back fence. So now what I'll do is I'll set up here to take off the edge here. And so what I want to do is I want to measure over from here to here 2.5 inches on the fence. And I'm targeting 2.5 inches again to the inside tooth. Okay, that looks good to me. So now we'll mount our board back up onto the fence. let's check it. Okay, that should work. It's actually just a hair under 2 inches. So now all we need to do is snip off the wood that's right here and also right here. We could do that using this fence, but then it'll end up cutting out some additional zero clearance holes down here, and we don't necessarily want to do that. So I'll go and set up the miter gauge to do that. Okay, we've got to set the height to a 1/2 inch. So I'll use this other setup block to do that. Okay. Now we can set the rip fence to help us out. And to do that, I'll just use the 3/4 inch setup block. And this time I want to measure to the outside of the tooth. Okay, that may be just a hair over. And bring the rip fence back. See if our tenon goes into the mortise. Okay, I'll take it over to the bench and hammer that in. I may need to remove just a little bit more material right down into this area back in here. But it should go together nicely, I believe. Okay, so here's the assembled mortise and tenon joint with the mortise being cut using mortising chisels. It turned out pretty nice. At least as nice as I could get it using mortising chisels. And it would have been probably about 10 times faster to do it using a router, but that's part of the fun of woodworking. You try out different things. What we'll be trying to do on the PantoRouter is to create what's called a triple miter. I've already got the ends of the boards cut with 45s in 2 directions, and then what we'll do is we'll cut mortises into here and also here, and then we'll insert a loose tenon into that mortise. And the loose tenon can also be cut at the PantoRouter, and so essentially the joint will go together like this, and it's kind of an interesting joint that I recently saw on the Woodworking with Jerry YouTube channel. And he did it using a much more intensive method, using a combination of various machines and hand tools to cut the mortise and tenon, as well as other features. And he actually used a regular mortise and tenon instead of a loose mortise and tenon, which is what we'll use. Okay, so let's head over to the PantoRouter and we'll see if we can cut the mortises into these boards. These boards measure 1 7/8 inch square, and so what I've done is I've set the fence at 1/2 of that, which is 15/16 of an inch, and then I've put a 1 inch mortising template up here on the PantoRouter centered, and I have a 3/8 inch spiral cutter bit mounted into the router. So now if I were to bring this forward, it should cut a mortise across that'll be almost 1 inch wide, and then we can cut a tenon for that just by using the same template and another board. So let's give this a shot. I have the template holder height set to 3/4 of an inch using a 3/4 inch setup block, and so that's been set. The corner of this board down here is lined up with the front of the table, and then I have the front stop set at 1 inch. However, we will not be able to get quite to 1 inch because the corner of this board is going to be poking up inside this. Now if I leave this open, that'll give me a little bit more clearance, so I'll give that a shot and see how that works. It may automatically close on us. Okay, so let's get started here. Depth of cut. So now let's take a peek at this and see how it worked out. Okay, so there's our mortise. That should work out right where it's cut. And now we need to cut another one. This time with a board in here a little bit differently. And now I've got to line up the front of this table with the corner of the board so I get the right depth of cut. Okay. The next board. Okay, so here's what the board looks like with 2 mortises cut. Okay, so we've got all three cut now. And now we just need to cut the loose tenons that'll fit into those mortises. I'm now ready to cut the tenons. I have just some spare 3/4 inch thick stock mounted up onto the table. And so what I've done here is I've set a swing stop so that when I put another board up here on the table, it'll come out to exactly the same position. It's just over 1.5 inches out from the edge of the table. I have a 1/2 inch spiral cutter bit mounted into the router, a 15mm bearing, and I'm not sure exactly where I have to have this 15mm bearing positioned so that I end up with a 3/8 inch tenon down here on the end. So what I'll do is I'll take off a small amount and then measure it. Right now I have the bearing follower all the way at the back of the template holder. So let's give this a shot and see what happens. Yeah, I've got 0.404 and we want 0.375, so we need to go a little bit smaller. So I'll move this bearing closer to the front. Try it again. Okay, I'm getting 0.3905, so we're getting closer. Zero 0.392. Zero 0.382. So we're about 5 thousandths over right now. Okay, so now I'm getting 0.362. So that's actually a little bit undersized. Let's bring it back out a little bit. And we'll go in a little bit further. Okay, that's at 0.376. So it's a thousandths over. There's 0.375. I'd like it to be a little bit smaller than that, just so that we've got kind of a slip fit. So what I'll do is I'll move it out ever so slightly. Okay, now we'll just go ahead and cut it. Okay, I'll have to remove the board from the table so that I can test it. Okay, so that fit into there nicely. Okay, so we just need to cut a couple more of these. And then we can cut the tenons off. Okay, now I'll take these over to the table saw and cut off the tenons. So close and yet so far away. These are supposed to look identical, and so you would have the tenon put into one of these slots, and unfortunately the other slot is pointed in the wrong direction. It should not be going in this way. Instead, it should be going in this way into the boards, because it's not possible to assemble the joint like this with the other mortise going in the wrong direction. So it was so close and yet so far away. Okay, let's see if we can cut the second mortise in the correct location in this triple miter. So what I've done is I've gone through and I've marked one of the mortises with an X, and I'll recut that one in the opposite direction. So up on the template holder, I've installed a vertical template holder, and then into that I've put the 1-inch mortising template, and I've raised up the template holder so that when the fowler is at the bottom here of the template, I can push this in and it just barely goes in to the existing mortise that's already cut there, that's going in the wrong direction. So I've got that set, and then when I bring this up, it should top out at the same location as the other mortise that's already there that's going in the wrong direction. I've set the depth of cut to 1 inch again, and I measured the inch from roughly this spot right here going in. And then I've set this board here, which has got a 45-degree bevel on the end of it, as a stop, so that when I put the next board up here, it'll hopefully go back into exactly the same location as this one is located at. Okay, so there's our mortise that we just cut. Right here. Now we'll go on to the next board. I've got these set up here in the correct orientation so I don't get mixed up. Okay, double check everything, make sure it looks good. Looks like it's in the right spot, so let's bring it forward. And that looks like that's in the right spot, I think. Okay, so we'll go ahead and make that cut. Okay, verify this one. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so now we'll take it back over to the workbench and see if it's able to be assembled. I've got the boards here. This is going to be tricky to assemble because these two tenons are going in the opposite directions, and so I'm not real sure here what the best approach would be. But let's try to get those two in. And now let's see if there's a way that we can get these two to go in at the same time. Now these two fit together real well here. And this one should fit together real well, but I'm struggling with how these need to be oriented for assembly. I'm thinking maybe that the tenons are a little bit too long. So what I'll do is I'll go snip those down so that they're not quite so long, and maybe there won't be quite so much interference. Okay, so that was the problem. The tenons were just a little bit too long. Triple miters gone together. As you can see here, the triple miters gone together. I had to cut two of the loose tenons that were inserted into one of the boards to get it so that the joint could be assembled together. And that's a pretty neat joint, and it should be real tight fitting together with those loose mortise and tenon joints inside, courtesy of the PantoRouter. Okay, that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.